Hey guys, tonight we drift deep into the heart of ancient West Africa, into a place the moon still kisses with soft, golden light. Imagine yourself stepping quietly through the tall grass at the edge of a sleeping city, stone walls glinting with mica dust, the scent of burnt acacia wood still lingering from the evening cook fires. You're here not for conquest, not for treasure, although, yes, there is quite a bit of that, but for something even rarer, a glimpse of how kings once counted gold, using beans. Yes, beans. Those humble little legumes you toss into your soup? Out here, in what used to be the powerful Ghana Empire, they served as calculators, ledgers, and quiet symbols of control. You probably won't survive this place if you're hoping for Wi-Fi or a flushing toilet, but your curiosity? That just might thrive.so. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into the ancient market square just as the moon spills light across rows of sleeping stalls. The tables are empty, but the gold is everywhere, hidden in plain sight. It sparkles under broken pots. It clings to the hems of forgotten robes. You reach down to touch a clay bowl, and it dusts your fingertips with flakes of history. There are no guards, no signs, no velvet ropes. And yet everything is sacred. The Ghana Empire, also called Wagadu, was once a hub for trade and wealth beyond comprehension. This wasn't the Ghana on today's map. Ancient Ghana lay farther north, in what is now southeastern Mauritania and western Mali. It flourished between the 6th and 13th centuries, long before most European kingdoms figured out forks. Here, gold wasn't just currency, it was culture. But the kings of Ghana didn't stack their gold in shiny pyramids or vaults. No, they organized it using something far more humble. Beans. You pass into a dimly lit courtyard, where the breeze carries the soft rustle of baobab leaves. In the center stands an old pot, cracked but not broken, filled halfway with smooth, oval beans. Cowpeas, to be exact. A staple crop across West Africa, hardy and drought-resistant. But here, they're doing math. Each bean in that pot represents a precise measure of gold. Not in coins, but in gold dust. The real deal, sifted and weighed carefully. One bean equals one nugget, or one tribute weight, or even one taxed unit from a passing trader. Imagine a world where your entire treasury system depends on not sneezing too hard. This wasn't a quirky hobby. It was a system, and surprisingly accurate. Beans were easy to count, easy to store, and if you were hungry, well, not recommended. The royal treasurers would scoop them into jars labeled with mud glyphs. Some beans stood for taxes collected, others for royal gifts. Still others? Fines. If you got caught cheating at market, you'd owe 2 beans worth of gold, and maybe an apology to the chief's goat, a mainstream fact for you to munch on. The Ghana Empire controlled two of the most lucrative resources on Earth at the time, gold and salt. And traders came from across the Sahara to get their hands on both. But here's a quirky little bonus. Not all beans were treated equally. Some were dyed red to symbolize sacred or untouchable transactions, like offerings to spirits or royal funerals. Others were painted with crushed termite hill clay for luck. Yes, termites. Even bugs got involved in your tax returns. You duck under a wooden arch into what was once a royal compound. The air changes, heavier. It smells like dust, sweat, and something floral. Hibiscus, maybe. You step into what might have been the treasury chamber. No chests, no vault doors, just more jars. Some cracked. One spilled across the floor like a broken promise. Historians still argue whether this bean system was entirely metaphorical, a visual teaching tool for scribes, or a literal method of day-to-day accounting. But many agree it mirrored a broader oral tradition, storing memory through tangible objects. No parchment, no ink, just beans, and minds sharper than obsidian. You crouch beside a broken jar. There's a faint pattern carved into the clay, a triangle, a hand, and 3 dots. Tribute from the southern villages, maybe, or a record of a bride price paid to a noble's daughter. You wonder who once touched this jar. Was it a royal clerk with tattooed arms? A priest counting blessings? Or maybe a sleepy assistant who spilled an entire month's economy before breakfast? And that's not a joke. Spill the wrong jar, and your entire financial record for that village vanishes. Not quite the same as losing your password, but close. Outside, the moon's higher now. It casts long shadows over the market, where silent stalls whisper stories of trade, gold for salt, ivory for silk, beans for meaning. You settle onto a cool stone, eyes half-lidded, fingers brushing the edge of another jar that you're not tired yet. But you're getting there. Because out here, in this forgotten empire, the weight of history doesn't crush you. It lulls you, gently, like a lullaby made of dust, cowpeas, and gold. You lean back against the stone wall, eyes tracing the faded glyphs carved into its surface, spirals, waves, and stick figures dancing like echoes from another age. Somewhere beyond the wall, a night bird calls, and a warm breeze nudges your hair like a whisper. Keep going, so you rise and wander into a narrow corridor that winds deeper into the compound. It smells of clay and time. On either side, clay jars rest on wooden shelves, some sealed with wax, others half opened, their contents long since spilled or claimed by ants. But one jar, slightly ajar, glints with something unusual. You peek inside that it's not gold. Not exactly. It's a mixture, tiny black cowpeas, each one smooth and matte, like a carefully polished stone. You scoop a few into your hand. They're cool to the touch, and you notice that a few have tiny etchings on them, little marks scratched in with a thorn or a bone needle. One has 3 lines, another a sunburst. These aren't ordinary beans. They're record keepers. The king's treasurer, let's call him an FA, once used these beans the way you might use a spreadsheet. Every week, after tribute was brought in from surrounding villages, NFA and his aides would retire into this cool treasury hut to begin the tallying process. But instead of punching keys or scribbling on scrolls, they used beans, brass weights, and an uncanny memory for numbers. Each tribute, say, a sack of gold dust or 2 blocks of salt, was assigned a symbolic bean. One color might represent the origin village. Another might indicate the type of goods. The scratches? Codes for quantity or tax category. You want to scoff, beans? Seriously? But then you remember that some modern computers still use punch cards and blinking lights. Beans don't seem so silly now that a mainstream historical gem for you. The Ghana Empire maintained one of the earliest recorded systems of centralized taxation in sub-Saharan Africa. Traders and local subjects alike paid tribute in the form of goods, especially gold, and the king's court monitored it all with meticulous systems, beans just being one of them. And now, the quirky twist you didn't see coming. Those beans? They weren't counted willy-nilly. Each session began with a cleansing ritual. An FA would light incense, hum a praise song to the ancestors, and pour a small libation of palm wine over the ground before even touching the ledger jars. The idea was simple. The beans weren't just counting tools. They were vessels for trust. And you don't mess with trust. You watch the imagined scene unfold. An FA, wrapped in indigo-dyed robes, dipping his fingers into one jar, then another, flicking beans into different clay bowls as his assistants whisper the tallies. 4 from Kumbi. Flick. 2 from the gold fields at Beret. Flick. 1 for the royal storehouse. Flick. Each flick echoes like a drumbeat of power. Quiet power. The kind that doesn't need shouting. You turn to look at the shelf again. There's a small brass weight beside the jars, shaped like a tiny crocodile, tail curled, mouth open. West African metalworkers were legendary for crafting these weights with stunning detail. They were used with equally intricate scales to weigh gold dust, another essential part of the system. Imagine a transaction at the market. A trader dumps a little gold dust onto a palm leaf. The seller pulls out a carved weight, maybe shaped like a chameleon this time, and adjusts the scale until it balances perfectly. No coins, just precision. Historians still argue whether the beans were purely symbolic, part of a ritualized act of remembrance, or whether they represented a fully functional inventory system, complete with checks, balances, and backup jars. One theory suggests there were audit beans kept in a separate, locked chamber, accessible only by the king and one trusted official. Another theory? They were edible backups, an accountant's lunch if the meeting ran long. Okay, that last one's less supported, but the point remains, this wasn't just bean counting. It was governance, surveillance, even diplomacy. The king could show a visiting envoy his beans. See, we received 5 tribute shipments from your side this season. So why are your people still fishing in our river? You step back and squint at one of the jars. It's marked with something faint, a symbol of crossed spears. Military tribute, perhaps? Maybe this jar recorded armor payments from the king's borderlands, or warriors granted land in return for loyalty. 1 bean per blade. 1 blade per promise that you're starting to see the beauty in it, the symmetry, the calm of it all. No chaos, no noisy auctions, no credit card disputes. Just quiet jars, patient hands, and the endless rustle of beans dropping like rain on the hard clay floor. You rest your hand on the lip of a jar and feel its slight vibration, like a memory still echoing. The treasury was never loud. It didn't need to be. Its silence was its power. The silence of people who remembered everything, down to the last grain of gold, the last flicked cowpea, the last whispered exchange between villages. Outside, a donkey brays in the distance. Maybe a ghost donkey, but still, it snaps you back. You blink. The chamber fades a little, swaying between dream and memory. You feel a kind of reverence here. Not for gold, not for kings, but for the system, the discipline, the quiet majesty of counting wealth not in numbers, but in stories, etched on beans, balanced with brass, and guarded by people who knew the value of remembering. You rise slowly, brushing the dust from your palms. The beans are still there, waiting, silent, but not forgotten. You shuffle back into the night air, the scent of warm earth and faded incense clinging to your tunic. The treasury door shuts behind you with a soft creak, but its echoes seem to linger, weaving themselves into the breeze. As you walk, the path widens, and soon you find yourself in a courtyard bathed in starlight. There, at the far end, sits a figure on a low wooden stool, arms folded, legs crossed. Utterly stilled, he wears boots made from leopard hide, soft and spotted, but unmistakably regal. A crown of woven reeds rests on his brow, dotted with tiny gold flakes that catch the moonlight. This is the king. Well, one of them. Let's call him Tunka, a name drawn from the annals of 11th century history. Though you've heard of kings who swing swords or roar in battle, this one, he rules through order, through memory, through cowpeas. His most powerful gesture isn't a shout. It's a flick of the wrist. He lifts one hand, and a page kneels beside him, holding a lacquered bowl filled with beans. Tunka dips his fingers in and begins to flick them into a clay dish. Each flick lands with the softest click, like rain tapping on polished wood. One bean for the gold just received from the southern miners. 2 beans for the caravan tax on salt bricks. 3 for diplomatic gifts from the Berbers who crossed the Sahara. You stand there, blinking, as the empire is governed in complete silence. Here's your historical anchor. Tunka was the ruler of the Ghana Empire around the mid-11th century, famed not just for his wealth, but for his administration. Arab scholars like al-Bakri wrote about how the king surrounded himself with interpreters, ministers, and a justice system that managed disputes without chaos or bloodshed, which, considering the era, is as rare as a polite YouTube comment. Tunka was also a man of spectacle. On public days, he would appear in full regalia, gold woven into his hair, armlets carved from ivory, and sometimes, yes, leopard print sandals, because being rich isn't fun unless you can also look ridiculous doing it. His throne was flanked by dogs wearing golden collars. Not guards, dogs. Who needs bodyguards when your schnauzer's wearing bling? But behind all that flash was this surprisingly quiet ritual, the bean flick. Each movement was intentional, graceful, and permanent. Once a bean was flicked, it stayed. It meant something. No erasers. No Control+Z. Just one bean, one record, one decision. You creep a little closer, trying not to disturb the air. The king is murmuring now, not to you, but to himself. Names, numbers, villages. Every bean flicked is accompanied by a whisper. Tagaza, 1 bar of salt. Flick. Yemu, 1 basket of kola nuts. Flick. Kumbi, 2 measures of dust. Flick. The assistants record nothing. They just listen, heads bowed, committing it to memory like sacred scripture. You might think, isn't this risky? What if someone forgets? And here's where it gets strange. Some historical sources suggest that memory training was so advanced in West Africa, especially among royal officials, that losing your memory was considered worse than losing your sword. Oral historians, griots, trained from childhood to retain thousands of names, deals, lineages, and events without a single written note. If your treasurer forgot how many beans got flicked, that wasn't just embarrassing. That was national collapse. And the quirky side fact for the night? Some kings were rumored to test their aides by swapping out a bean mid-tally and seeing if anyone noticed. Fail, and you didn't get fired. You got reassigned to goat duty. Or worse, assigned to count goats. Historians still argue whether this bean counting ceremony was more public performance than real accounting. Was it ritual to impress subjects and ambassadors? Or an actual fiscal procedure? Some believe it was both, a blend of spiritual symbolism and administrative precision. After all, what better way to remind your people of your wealth than literally counting it out in front of them, bean by golden bean? You sit now, watching the king's fingers move with hypnotic rhythm. You lose count. 20, 30, maybe more. Each bean becomes a drop in a river, a pulse in a drumbeat. Together, they form a map of the empire, its strengths, its promises, its quiet contracts. And just when you think he's finished, the king gestures again. A servant brings forth a sealed jar. With great care, he opens it and reveals a smaller set of beans, bright red, shiny, coated in something glossy. These are the royal reserve beans, used only when disaster strikes. Famine, war, or betrayal. He flicks one into a dish. Just one that you don't ask what it means. You don't need to. Instead, you glance up at the stars, quiet, flickering dots in the sky, not so different from the beans below. Both marking time, both telling stories, both waiting to be read by someone patient enough to listen, and you're beginning to understand something. In this empire, wealth wasn't just about having gold. It was about tracking it, respecting it, knowing its story from the moment it was dug out of the ground to the moment it turned into a bean flicked by a king. Tunka Minin looks up, his eyes meeting yours, not in judgment, but with a tired sort of pride. He flicks one final bean, whispers a final name, and then silence. The bowl is empty, the jar sealed. The empire, for now, balanced. You let out a breath you didn't know you were holding. You rise, your legs slightly stiff from sitting too long in reverence. The king doesn't acknowledge your departure, nor does he need to. His role tonight has ended, not in a speech or dramatic flourish, but in the simple sealing of a jar. You back away, the sounds of night reclaiming the courtyard, insects buzzing lazily, a distant drumbeat, the occasional bark of one of those gold-collared dogs. You follow a narrow path that twists past adobe walls and low huts, their roofs crowned with thatch. A faint glow draws you onward. You turn a corner and find a flickering fire surrounded by a small group of men and women. They're not royalty. These are traders, tired, sun-worn, cloaked in layers of dust from the road. One sips from a gourd, another plucks at a stringed instrument. They speak in low tones, occasionally glancing toward a small cloth bag resting near the fire. You recognize the bag's bulge, gold dust. It glimmers faintly in the firelight, like sugar sprinkled on velvet. This is not ceremonial tribute. This is currency, ready to change hands before the night ends. No coins, no bills, just dust. Portable, divisible, and, in the right hands, immensely valuable. That here's your historical anchor. In West Africa, especially across the Ghana, Mali, and Songhai empires, gold dust was the principal medium of exchange. Traders carried it in pouches, gourds, or hollowed-out bamboo tubes, often tied with leather straps or hidden inside tunics. Standardized brass weights and scales ensured fair transactions, though trust was always part of the deal. You couldn't exactly return a purchase because your scale was off by a cowpea. You settle beside the group, nodding gently. A woman notices your interest and nudges the cloth bag toward you. Inside are not just flakes of gold, but a tiny brass weight shaped like a lizard. She offers a demonstration, her hand steady, her scale balanced across a polished stick. She sprinkles just enough dust to lift the counterweight. Satisfied, she nods. Then a debate begins. It's not heated, more like verbal dancing. The man with the stringed instrument wants to trade for a carved ivory pendant, but he wants to offer cola nuts and a bolt of dyed cloth. The woman, clearly the sharper negotiator, insists on more. A handful of salt, a second bolt, and, finally, one pinch of gold dust, just enough to satisfy the wait. It's a deal sealed not with handshakes, but with a small grunt of agreement and the ritualistic nod both parties exchange. You smile. It's like watching ancient eBay, minus the scamming and shipping fees. Now, the quirky twist. These traders never actually spoke the same language. Not fluently, anyway. Across vast trade networks, from the forests of the South to the sands of the Sahara, commerce thrived in silence. Quite literally, there existed a method called silent trade or dumb barter. Goods would be laid out at a designated location. One group would leave, the other would arrive, assess, leave their offer, and retreat. If the first group agreed, they'd take the goods. If not, they'd wait for a better offer. Not a single word exchanged. Just trust, patience, and the ever-present threat of walking away with nothing. Historians still argue whether these silent trades were widespread or mostly localized to certain regions. Some say it was symbolic diplomacy between vastly different cultures, Berber traders and Mande merchants, for instance, who couldn't risk miscommunication. Others suggest it was just a clever way to avoid haggling. Honestly, who wouldn't want that? You watch as another transaction begins. This time, a length of dyed indigo cloth for a woven reed mat. No gold involved, just barter. And yet, in the background, one of the men meticulously logs the gold dust's weight in the dirt with a stick, carving simple hash marks next to a pile of pebbles. You recognize the rhythm of record keeping. It echoes the treasury, the king, the beans. From royal courts to roadside fires, the principle is the same. Count it, track it, respect it. The fire crackles, and one trader pulls a gourd from her satchel. She offers it to you. The liquid inside tastes like fermented honey and pepper. You cough politely. She laughs. A universal language. You start to understand how this economy thrived. It wasn't just gold. It was the relationships, the rituals, the shared understanding that a deal wasn't just an exchange of goods, but a small ceremony of trust. And here comes a callback. Remember those beans etched with symbols? Some traveling traders carried their own versions, not to track taxes, but to tally sales. Each night, they'd line up their beans and count how many matched each product. Cowpeas for ivory, black-eyed beans for salt, red ones for fabric. No scrolls, no ink, just beans and memory. Again, a camel snorts nearby, tethered to a post just beyond the circle. It shifts, stamping the ground impatiently. You glance up and see a caravan preparing to move. They'll travel at night, guided by the stars and the cool air, heading north across the Sahel toward the distant dunes. You rise, too, brushing sand from your hands. The traders nod to you. Not quite goodbye, not quite welcome. Just an acknowledgement. You've shared a circle, a fire, and a glimpse into how wealth really worked here. Not hoarded, but exchanged. Not screamed about, but quietly measured. Behind you, the fire dims, and ahead, the caravan begins to move. You walk alongside them, your steps crunching lightly over sand as the stars turn slowly above you. Somewhere, a jar is being sealed. Somewhere else, a scale is being balanced. It's all connected. Every bean, every flake of dust, every flick of a king's hand or nod of a trader's chin. You pull your cloak tighter around you. The desert wind is rising. The night wraps around you like a soft woolen shawl as the caravan begins its slow crawl toward the horizon. Camels sway rhythmically, each step planting firm pads into the sand with a hushed crunch. You're walking beside a young boy, no older than 12, maybe 13, who wears a tightly wrapped headscarf and carries a satchel slung across his chest. He's humming something tuneless, but oddly calming, like the desert itself has taught him how to hum in lowercase that you're now on the trade route. The golden artery that pulses between the forests of southern West Africa and the salt mines of the north. The Sahara looms ahead, but for now, the terrain is gentle. Acacia trees lean sleepily in the distance. Night birds chirp, and above you, the Milky Way sprawls like spilled sugar on black velvet. Here's your historical anchor. The trans-Saharan trade routes were the lifeblood of West Africa's empires. For centuries, camel caravans carried salt, gold, ivory, cola nuts, and enslaved people between the cities of the Sahel and the Mediterranean world. These weren't random trips. They were organized with military precision, guided by desert nomads, protected by hired guards, and paced according to the stars. And speaking of salt, yes, the boring white stuff on your fries, it was one of the most valuable commodities in this ancient economy. Why? Because sweating in 115 degrees Fahrenheit without electrolytes is not a fun time, and refrigeration hadn't been invented yet. Salt preserved food, maintained health, and even served as currency. Some chunks of salt were so large they had to be sawed into bars and carried like bricks. Now comes the quirky bit. The infamous town of Tagaza in the Sahara wasn't really a town. It was more like a dystopian salt fantasy camp, built entirely of salt blocks. Walls, roofs, furniture, everything. Imagine living in a house where your bathroom could dissolve if you spilled water too hard. The boy beside you grins suddenly and tosses you a chunk of something brittle and white. You taste it cautiously. Yep, salt. He laughs. You realize he's making a joke, pretending it's gold. There's an old desert saying. He tells you in a mix of hand gestures and broken phrases, salt is for the body. Gold is for the story. You nod solemnly, pretending you understand, because it sounds wise and you're too tired to ask follow-up questions. Historians still argue whether salt and gold were always exchanged pound for pound, or if other factors like droughts, political instability, or royal decrees caused wild price swings. Some claim that during especially dry seasons, a slab of salt was worth more than its weight in gold dust. Others say that's an exaggeration, like saying avocados were once worth a mortgage payment. Either way, both were priceless in their own way. The caravan crests a ridge, revealing a view that stops you cold. Far below, nestled in a bowl of sand and shadow, sits a night market glowing with torchlight. You hadn't expected this. Out here in the middle of nowhere, a full bazaar has been set up for travelers. Tents of indigo cloth flap gently in the wind. Camels kneel in rows. People of every skin tone and language mingle without shouting, negotiating with gestures and glances. You can smell roasted meat, spiced tea, and the faint but unmistakable aroma of fermented millet. You descend carefully into the camp, the sand slipping beneath your feet. The hum of the marketplace wraps around you like a lullaby. A griot, one of the professional storytellers, sits cross-legged near a central fire, his voice low and melodic. He's telling a tale of Sundiata, the Lion Prince of Mali, and how he once tricked an invading army using goats and a broken drum. You try to follow, but your focus drifts. Your eyes keep going back to a woman hunched over something shiny beneath her lantern. You approach, slowly, and see what she's doing, weighing gold dust with a portable scale carved from bone. Her counterweights are shaped like crocodiles, turtles, and birds. She sees you watching and raises an eyebrow, as if to say, "You've never seen portable commerce before?" You smile and squat beside her, asking silently if you can watch. She nods, barely glancing up. The dust she's handling is finer than anything you've seen before, almost like golden powder. She works quickly but methodically. Every few grains, she adjusts the counterweight, makes a small grunt, and sprinkles a little more into a tiny pouch. No ledgers, no guards, just precision and mutual understanding. A buyer drops a small bag at her side, cowrie shells. Yes, cowrie shells. You remember hearing they were once used as money in West Africa, traded in enormous quantities along with gold and salt. In some regions, shells were more common than coins for centuries. And here's a curious fringe fact. In parts of West Africa, cowries were believed to have magical properties: protection, fertility, luck. Some women even braided them into their hair, not just for beauty, but as low-key financial security. Braided banking. If you will, you realize now how layered this economy was. It wasn't just gold beans and salt slabs. It was gold and memory, salt and ritual, cowries and charm, currency and culture intertwined that a man near you offers you a sip from a metal cup. It's bitter, smoky tea made from desert herbs. He tells you, in halting words, that his family's been crossing the Sahara for 3 generations. He doesn't carry gold. He carries stories. He trades them for food and favors. You wonder, how many generations have passed these routes, these markets, these whispered exchanges? You lean back, feeling the warmth of the fire, the buzz of hushed conversation, the soft sound of metal scales tipping, and somewhere, deep in your mind, you hear the click of a bean landing in a bowl, that it's all still connected. You sleep a little beneath a folded cloth, tucked beside a camel that snores. Yes, snores, like a man who's had a long day of carrying treasure. The desert chill presses gently against your cheeks, but the fire still flickers in the distance, and the soft rustle of fabric and whispered bartering continues long after you close your eyes, by the time the first dull pinks of sunrise bleed across the sky. The market is vanishing, like a dream you only half remember. Traders pack quickly, some laughing, others already focused on the miles ahead. The scent of wood smoke lingers. You rise, brushing sand from your arms, and rejoin the caravan as it begins to move again, this time towards something different. A city. The towers appear first, low on the horizon, half swallowed by the haze. They rise like melted candles, earthy and uneven, but majestic in their own way. This is Jen, one of West Africa's most storied cities. You approach slowly, step by step, each detail sharpening. Adobe walls, domed rooftops, narrow alleys where goats nap beside baskets of okra. You've arrived at a hub not just of trade, but of faith, scholarship, and record-keeping that here's your historical anchor. Jen, alongside its even more famous cousin Timbuktu, was a center of Islamic learning and commerce from the 13th century onward. Pilgrims and traders alike came here, drawn by both gold and God. The Great Mosque of Jen, constructed from mud and timber, still stands today as the world's largest mud brick building, a surreal blend of geometry, texture, and devotion. And now, the quirky twist. Every year after the rainy season, the entire city joins together to replaster the mosque. Yes, the whole city. Adults, kids, elders. It's like Coachella, but everyone's covered in mud instead of glitter. They climb ladders, sing songs, and smear wet earth across its walls to protect it from erosion. It's a sacred chore and a community flex. You see the structure now. Its wooden beams sticking out like porcupine spines. A few kids are already climbing them, giggling as they pretend to be warriors. You smile. No one tells them to stop. You weave through the marketplace toward the inner quarters, where scribes sit in the shade of narrow verandas, their ink-stained fingers busy with long scrolls. Here, people don't just count gold, they record it. Meticulously, the scribes dip thin reeds into black ink and scratch neat Arabic script onto parchment. These are not mere bookkeepers. They are respected scholars, trained in theology, law, astronomy, and economics. One gestures to you, then points to a scroll filled with columns and strange marks, part inventory, part poetry. This is the heartbeat of something bigger than trade, a civilization where commerce and culture go hand in hand. Taxes are tracked, wills are drafted, business deals sealed with script, not just handshakes. You peer closer and notice something unexpected, a diagram of a bean. Yes, a bean. The old method, using beans to count and categorize, is being translated here, digitized in its own way. One bean's symbol equals a known weight of gold dust. Another indicates a type of commodity. This isn't just nostalgia, it's innovation. People still use beans, but now they're backed by ink. Historians still argue whether this blending of oral and written tradition made West African record-keeping stronger or more vulnerable. Some believe the coexistence helped ideas flourish, stories and ledgers working together. Others say important knowledge may have been lost between generations, especially when outside empires arrived with their own systems and began, quite literally, rewriting the story. You walk slowly through the scribe's quarter, past bundles of parchment and shelves stacked with cowhide-bound books. A soft breeze rustles the pages, and you imagine them whispering to each other. Records of gold paid in tribute, merchants' ledgers, marriage contracts, even complaints about missing donkeys. All preserved in ink, faith, and discipline. A scribe invites you to sit. He places a small board in front of you and offers a pot of ink. He gently guides your hand to form a single Arabic letter, curved, elegant, frustratingly slippery. You try again, then again. By the fourth attempt, he nods approvingly, even though your version looks like a duck got dizzy on a seesaw. You both laugh. The air feels lighter, and now, a callback. Remember the gold beans stored in royal jars? Well, those beans weren't just private treasures. Sometimes, they became endowments. Wealthy merchants or kings would donate measured jars of gold, counted in beans, then logged in ink, to fund mosques, schools, or water wells. A bean could build a roof. A jar could change a village. Each scribe here knows that. They don't just track wealth, they help direct it. You follow a narrow stairwell to a rooftop overlooking the city. The mosque looms large to the east. Market stalls pulse with life to the west. Somewhere below, a child shouts something about a goat stealing okra. You breathe it all in. The balance between sun and mud, gold and ink, tradition and transformation. Beside you, an elder leans on a walking stick, watching the horizon. He mutters something under his breath, too quiet to catch. But then he repeats it for you. Gold travels, but paper remembers. You're not sure if it's a proverb or a warning, but it feels like both. And as the day warms and the scribes return to their parchment, you realize the system you've been chasing isn't just about counting treasure. It's about preserving intention. Every bean, every pouch of dust, every written word has meaning, placement, and purpose. You start to descend from the rooftop, slow and thoughtful. The city hums around you, alive with counting, not just in numbers, but in value. A boy recites a prayer beside a scribe. A woman wraps a fish in parchment. A small girl giggles as she weighs a frog on a pretend scale, but it's all still connected. As you leave Jin, your sandals coated in a thin crust of reddish clay, the road beckons again, narrower now, winding between baobab trees that stand like ancient, upside-down giants. Their thick trunks bulge as if they've eaten too many secrets, and their gnarled limbs twist into the sky like the fingers of a thoughtful old sage. You follow a caravan southward this time. Traders laugh, goats bleat, and somewhere behind you a griot's drum still echoes faintly, as though the city you've left behind refuses to let go just yet. You're headed toward the gold fields, the actual places where those shiny dust particles begin their journey toward royal jars and counting beans. The further you go, the more the land changes. Lusher, wetter. You begin to see streams, more birds, and small farming villages tucked between rolling hills. This is the zone the old geographers called the Wanyera region, less a pinpoint on a map and more a sprawling network of gold-producing communities, mostly hidden, often mobile, and fiercely protected. Here's your mainstream historical nugget. Much of West Africa's gold came from this area, produced not in vast industrial pits, but in narrow, hand-dug shafts or riverbeds. Men and women, yes, both, labored in small teams, using wooden pans and woven baskets to sift flakes from river mud. These operations weren't amateur hour. They were organized by local leaders, protected by trade alliances, and, this is the kicker, often kept intentionally secret. And here's the quirky bit. Some sources say that gold miners in certain communities worked under total silence. Not spiritual silence, but literal silence. No talking, not a word. The belief was that words would disturb the spirits of the earth, making the gold retreat deeper underground. So imagine that, teams of miners, knee-deep in river silt, communicating only through hand gestures and glances. It was part superstition, part spiritual respect, and, honestly, part genius. Because silence also meant secrecy, and secrecy meant security. You reach one such riverside camp just before dusk. Fires flicker like stars turned upside down. Children chase chickens around circular huts. A woman in a faded green wrapper welcomes you with a bowl of something steaming, millet porridge laced with peanut. You sit cross-legged beside the fire, watching a few men rinse pans in the river. Even now, they do it with reverence, as though disturbing the water too much might offend whatever spirit grants gold. The elder of the village joins you. His hands are rough with earth, but his voice is smooth, like carved wood. He tells you, without arrogance, that his ancestors have worked these rivers for 1,000 years. He points to a nearby tree marked with small carvings, symbols that look like stars, waves, and a coiled snake. He calls it the ledger tree. When a particularly large nugget was found, it wasn't just hidden away or sold. It was recorded, not with ink, but with notches and signs in the bark. The community remembered its own riches, even if outsiders never saw them. Historians still argue whether these communities had centralized authority over their gold or whether each village functioned autonomously, operating on trust and oral law. Some believe regional kings oversaw the flow and taxed it accordingly. Others suggest that gold was more decentralized than we think, moving not just in caravans, but through marriage alliances, gifts, and quiet backdoor trades that as the night deepens, you're invited to witness something rare, a ritual blessing over a fresh gold find. The nugget is no larger than your thumbnail, but it glints in the firelight like it's winking at you. It's placed in a wooden bowl, surrounded by herbs, and passed around a tight circle of elders who murmur blessings. Not loud, not dramatic. Just gentle affirmations and thanks that you're offered a chance to hold it. It's heavier than it looks, and for a strange second, it doesn't feel like metal. It feels like memory, like story, like time compressed into an object. After the ceremony, the nugget isn't weighed or locked away. It's placed in a pouch and tied to a stick in the center of camp. A child is tasked with watching it until dawn, not because theft is feared, but because no one should ever be alone with power, the elder says softly. That line stays with you. The fire burns low. Someone passes you a carved gourd of cool water. You sip it, eyes heavy, ears filled with the gentle sounds of frogs and rustling leaves. For a brief moment, the whole world feels slowed down. Not sleepy, just deeply, anciently unhurried. Before you drift into a light doze, you remember something. The woman in gin weighing gold beans had one with a notch in it. A tiny carved crescent. You thought it was decorative, but now you wonder, was it a code? A way to trace where the gold came from? Could that bean have once been held by this same elder, this same village? You smile. This is how history connects, not in dates and kings, but in passing hands, quiet rituals, and remembered trees. Just before sleep takes you, the elder leans close and whispers, "Gold is the breath of the earth." We just catch it mid-sigh. And somewhere, back in your memory, a bean clicks softly into its bowl that it's all still connected. You wake to bird song, gentle, rhythmic, like the river's lullaby never stopped overnight. A breeze drifts in, carrying the scent of damp earth, sweet millet, and something faintly metallic, like the ghost of yesterday's gold. The sun is just beginning to peek over the trees, throwing soft golden light across the river's surface. You stretch beneath a mosquito net, and as you step outside the small hut, you notice the camp has already sprung to life. Miners are at work, not hurried, deliberate, like dancers who know the choreography by heart. Pans dip, water swirls, mud falls away, fingers search, gold waits. This morning, though, you're not staying long. Your journey continues through the savannah, with tall grass swaying like an audience of whispers. You ride on a donkey this time, stubborn, sure, but undeniably charming. A bird lands on its back at one point, and neither of you are surprised that you're headed toward the kingdom of Mali. Not modern Mali, mind you. This is the Mali of the 13th and 14th centuries, one of the richest and most organized empires in the medieval world. It stretches like a golden web from the Atlantic coast inland, linking cities, rivers, and hearts. At its height, Mali controlled vast gold resources, key trade routes, and centers of Islamic scholarship like Timbuktu. Here's your historical centerpiece. The Mali Empire was ruled by kings known as Musa, the most famous of whom, Mansa Musa, became legendary for his unimaginable wealth and his extravagant pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324. He reportedly brought so much gold with him that he caused inflation in Cairo for years. Whoops! But before you get swept away in Musa Musa's golden trail, you need to understand what made Mali work. You ride through villages that feel organized, almost choreographed. Granaries are neatly arranged. Market stalls are standardized. Local chiefs gather under shaded meeting trees, taking notes with symbols in the dirt. Tax collectors don't look like goons. They look like friendly librarians, walking around with leather pouches and wax tablets. Now the quirky angle. Mali's court officials often wore elaborate robes stitched with charms, small pouches sewn into the fabric containing Quranic verses, folk remedies, or protective talismans. You pass a city gate and see one such robe hanging like a tapestry, each charm shaped like a bean, feather, or tooth. It's a reminder, even in the most powerful courts, people still believed in the magic of small things as you approach Niamey, the capital of Mali during Musa Musa's time. You see that wealth here doesn't always scream. It hums. Large mud brick palaces are softened by vine-covered walls. Bronze door knockers in the shape of crocodiles gleam in the sun. A girl walks by carrying a pot on her head that's balanced like it's floating, and she grins when you stare too long that you're invited to a council meeting. Not a rowdy debate, but a thoughtful exchange. Elders, scholars, merchants, even a representative from a distant salt mining region. They're discussing trade routes and tax policies. You sit cross-legged on a woven mat and sip strong tea laced with ginger, listening to an official explain how gold is transported from the Wangara mines to Timbuktu using coated clay seals and, yes, your favorite, beans. Here's how it works. Let's say you want to move 100 beans worth of gold from one city to another. You put it in a sealed pot. The seal has a stamped symbol, like a turtle or a wave, that matches a code known only to the sender and the receiver. Inside the pot, along with the gold dust or nuggets, there's a tally made of actual beans, each dyed a different color for different weights. Red beans? That's the gold from the Upper Niger. Black beans? That's from the Falim River. It's not just currency, it's metadata. A bean-based barcode system. Genius. Historians still argue whether this code system was widespread or limited to royal trade, but many agree it gave the Mali Empire an edge in verifying and tracking wealth without relying entirely on written ledgers. The bean became more than a counter. It was a passport, a signature, a story. You step outside the palace into the cooling shade of early afternoon. A group of boys plays a game near the palace wall, flicking pebbles onto a chalk-drawn board. They're mimicking the counting method of gold beans, guessing weights, making trades, laughing when someone messes up the math. One of them uses a dried okra pod as his gold jar. You've never seen economics look so adorable. As you walk toward the gardens, you spot a worker harvesting kola nuts, another valuable trade good. He pauses to let you sample one. It's bitter, so bitter your eyebrows try to leave your face. He laughs and pats your back as you recover. That means it's good, he says. You're not so sure. In the royal archives, you get to see something rare, a tax document carved onto wood. It lists households and their gold contributions using a mix of Arabic numerals and coded symbols. Next to some entries are bean icons. Not actual beans, drawings of them, each with a little flourish or curl on one end. One looks suspiciously like a mustache. You suspect a scribe had a sense of humor. Your guide explains that these bean symbols weren't just for fun. They signified the quality of the gold. Smooth beans meant refined dust. Pointed beans? That meant nugget gold. Hollow beans? That was suspected counterfeit material, usually mixed with copper or lead. A bean wasn't just a bean. It was an entire grading system. And just as you're admiring a particularly intricate carving of a double bean symbol, your guide drops one last gem. In Mali, she says, gold was weighed in the marketplace, yes, but it was judged in the heart. That night, under a sky stitched with stars and the scent of wood smoke curling through palm trees, you dream of beans again. But this time they sing. By morning, you've become a bit of a bean snob. You find yourself eyeing everything in the market, pouches, rings, even goat bells, with a quiet, inner voice asking, is this 2 bean weight or 3? It's becoming a habit, like checking for Wi-Fi signals in the middle of a desert. The market at Niani is buzzing, literally. There's a man selling beeswax candles, and the bees themselves seem to have joined the marketing campaign. You dodge a few before slipping into a narrow stall with embroidered fabric and polished cowrie shells. But you're here for one thing: to trace how these gold beans moved from these inland markets toward the coast, and eventually across oceans. The story doesn't stay put in Mali. From here, you begin to follow the trade routes westward, routes that snake toward the Atlantic, through dense forests and humid valleys, past communities like the Susu and the Baga. You ride part of the way on a creaky riverboat powered by a man with arms like tree trunks and a laugh so loud it scares off birds. Somewhere on the deck, someone is frying plantains, and the scent wraps itself around your clothes like a hungry spirit. Now here's your historical main dish. Long before Europeans arrived with gunpowder and greed, West Africans had already built trade links with North Africa, the Middle East, and, possibly, Southern Europe. Gold was the central player. It left this continent through multiple veins, carried by camel to the north, floated downriver to the coast, and, in some cases, exchanged for goods like salt, cloth, horses, or, you guessed it, beads. But there's an odd twist here. Some communities didn't value gold as currency the same way outsiders did. To them, gold was more ceremonial than transactional. It was worn, buried, melted into shapes with symbolic power. In some forest regions, gold dust was considered too sacred for trade. Instead, they used iron or cowries. Gold was something you danced in, not bought groceries with. Quirky tidbit incoming. In certain communities, women wore gold jewelry shaped like miniature spoons, not for eating, but for flicking gold dust into ceremonial fires. It was called feeding the ancestors. Picture that, a woman in a bright wrapper, casually tossing flecks of gold into a fire like she's seasoning a memory. Chef's kiss as you travel through one such community, a coastal town shaped like a conch shell. You see a ceremony in progress. Elders in indigo robes chant over a clay urn filled with river water and 2 smooth gold beans floating on top. One for the present, one for the ancestors. Your guide whispers. Historians still argue whether this coastal gold usage influenced transatlantic trade systems later on, or if it remained entirely localized and ritual-based. What's more intriguing, archaeological digs along the coast have unearthed bean-shaped molds made of fired clay, suggesting these communities may have made their own gold beans, not to use, but to give. As gifts, as talismans, you reach a bustling port city, one that, centuries later, would be renamed by the Portuguese. For now, it's just a swirl of thatched roofs, wooden docks, and merchant houses made from woven palm mats. Here, gold finally begins to change hands across continents. You see foreign merchants, Berbers, possibly some Moors. They trade salt, cloth, even exotic spices in exchange for gold. And when gold changes hands, out come the beans. These merchants don't trust scales alone. They use their own sets of counting beans, each dyed with rare pigments. Blue for verified dust, green for mixed gold, red for suspect batches. Arguments occasionally break out when two merchants compare bean sets and realize one has been cheating with a lighter wood. You witness a small scuffle that ends with someone tossing a bean dramatically into the ocean. That poor bean deserved better. The port hums with more than just commerce. It hums with movement, with the swirl of languages, the clatter of crates, the creak of boats. In the corner of one dockyard, you see scribes copying trade manifests, not on paper, but on flat pieces of leather. Names, weights, origin towns, and bean symbols again. One with what looks like wings, another shaped like a tiny sun. These are marks of origin, legitimacy, and pride. You visit a storehouse where gold beans are sorted into tiers, not by weight, but by story. The oldest ones, those said to have come from the deepest mines, or those associated with royal lineage, are kept in a sealed basket with locks carved from ebony wood. You're allowed to peek inside for just a moment. One bean is engraved with a spiral. Another has a chipped edge but is wrapped in red thread. Each one feels like it has lived more than you have. Not just gold, not just value, but time, memory. A full biography condensed into a pebbled as the sun sets over the port, painting the waves in strokes of fire. You sit with a young merchant who tells you about her grandmother, the first in her family to use gold beans in trade. She says, "My grandmother said each bean has its own heartbeat. You just have to hold it long enough to hear." So you try. You take one of the small replica beans she offers you, a ceremonial one made of brass, and place it in your palm. It's smooth, cool, silent. But for just a moment, maybe, you hear it dot a faint thump, then another, like the quiet knock of history asking to be remembered. You wake beside the sea. The air tastes like salt and charcoal, like the echo of night fires and the whisper of old sails. The tide murmurs just a few steps away, pulling on the edges of a fishing net left to dry, as if trying to reclaim it. You watch as the sky slowly bruises from blue to gold, and fishermen, barefoot and laughing, push out their boats. But you're not staying at the coast. Not today, because the gold beans have more to tell you. And now they begin to travel across much wider waters. You join a small trade party headed north along the coast. No cars, just feet, pack animals, and a suspiciously loud chicken tied to a bundle of cloth. You half expect the chicken to start weighing beans herself, the way she stares at your pouch of trinkets. She's got attitude. You name her Madam Audit. Along the route, you learn about the middlemen of West African trade, the Dayala. These were itinerant traders, Muslim merchants who moved freely across kingdoms, respected for their knowledge of trade ethics and their uncanny ability to organize routes that made even spaghetti seem logical. Here's your key historical fact. The Dayala created some of the most sophisticated trade networks in pre-colonial Africa, often stretching hundreds of miles and involving dozens of languages and currencies. Gold, of course, remained their crown jewel. You travel with a Dayala merchant named Baba. His robes are as clean at the end of the day as they were at sunrise, which frankly feels unfair. His pack contains everything from salt bricks to prayer beads to, you guessed it, bean counters made from turtle shell. He hands you one to try. You fumble it. It makes a sound like a frog sneezing. As you stop in a market town nested between hills, Baba shows you a ledger, not written, but sung. That's right, a griot, a traditional oral historian, recites transactions in song, each melody tied to a specific customer or deal. 4 strings of cowries from the north / 2 bundles of cloth / and 6 beans of the river's gold. A live, breathing spreadsheet. The fringe tidbit? Some griots were known to intentionally missing the amount if they didn't like the merchant involved. Passive-aggressive accounting, centuries before email. Baba tells you of one griot who refused to sing for a corrupt nobleman unless he made a public apology and paid double, which he did, just to get a proper receipt. Historians still argue whether these sung ledgers were reliable records or more like ceremonial mnemonics, but many agree that they provided a consistent framework for trade in places where literacy wasn't the primary mode of documentation. And more importantly, they made bookkeeping weirdly catchy. As you continue north, Baba explains how gold wasn't always carried in bulk. Sometimes it was transported by quiet runners, people tasked with hiding gold beans in pouches sewn into their clothing or even braided into their hair. You meet one such runner, now elderly, who shows you a beaded head wrap with hollow shells where beans could be stashed. You'd be surprised, she says with a wink, how heavy your head can feel when you're thinking in gold. You reach the edge of the Sahel, the vast semi-arid zone that stretches across Africa like a dusty sash. Here, the roads split. One trail leads north toward the desert. Another veers east, toward the old Hausa city-states. Baba gives you a choice. You flip a bean. It lands with the flat side up. East it is. As you walk through windswept grasslands and scrubby acacia trees, the terrain changes. Hills rise like old shoulders. Villages cluster around wells and rock outcrops. In one, you encounter a blacksmith who doesn't trade in gold, but knows its weight by instinct. He holds a gold bean between thumb and forefinger and says, "It's not heavy. It's important." Then he nods once, like that's all the math he needs. You find more bean ledger variants here. One scribe uses colored stones, another, bits of dyed cotton tied in knots. But the bean remains the ideal. Durable, tactile, easy to count, impossible to forget. Some even say a bean's slight curve helps it stay in the mind, like a smile that lingers after the joke. In one market, a woman is selling bean charms, not actual gold, but replicas carved from bone or wood. Each has a different symbol painted on it: a crescent moon, a spear, a hand with an eye in its palm. She tells you they're lucky, especially for travelers. You buy one, of course. Yours has a tiny turtle painted on it. For patience, she says. You consider asking if she has one for not tripping over roots, because you've done it 5 times today. That night, under a makeshift tent stitched from worn goat hide and prayer cloth, you and Baba share tea laced with pepper and mint. He tells you about a city to the east, Kano, where gold was sometimes used to pay architects and artisans who built mosques and homes for the elite. One particularly famous builder is said to have demanded his entire payment in gold beans and kept them in a series of hollowed-out gourds. His house, they say, had no locks, just gourd traps that he'd know if one was missing by the change in sound when the wind blew. Baba laughs at this. If you can trust the wind to guard your wealth, he says, then maybe you've earned it. You fall asleep to the soft sound of sand brushing against the tent's edge and the gentle shuffle of Baba counting his beans in the dark. Not to hoard them, just to listen, like he's tuning a piano made of history. You wake up wrapped in heat. The tent has turned into a slow cooker, and even your dream sweat has sweat. Baba is already up, stirring a pot of millet porridge that somehow smells like both cinnamon and charcoal. He offers you a bowl without a word, just a knowing look, like, yes, you'll need this. Because today, you're going into the desert. Not all the way, don't worry. Your face won't fall off from sun exposure, probably, but just enough to glimpse how far the gold beans really traveled and who risked their lives to carry them. The desert doesn't start with a dramatic line in the sand. It creeps. Grass thins. Trees twist into ghosts. Villages become rare, then mythic. You ride a camel now, and yes, it's as uncomfortable as it sounds. Your legs dangle like overcooked noodles. The camel's name is Jen, and he clearly disapproves of your balance. Or your whole vibe. Hard to say. Baba introduces you to a Tuareg guide, wrapped in indigo from head to toe, only his eyes visible. He barely speaks, but his every movement is confident. He knows this land like you know your phone's lock screen. Here's your big historical fact. The Tuareg were key players in the trans-Saharan gold trade, serving as guides, guardians, and sometimes fierce negotiators. They moved goods from West Africa to North Africa, salt southward, gold northward. And in return, horses, textiles, books, ideas. But the desert was never easy. Caravans would sometimes vanish. Sandstorms could erase a route in hours. And thirst wasn't a problem. It was a lifestyle. That's why Tuareg traders sometimes carried small pouches of salt, not to trade, but to lick, just enough to trick the body into thinking water was nearby. It wasn't, but the lie helped. As you bump along the camel's spine, you hear the soft clink of something under the guide's tunic. Turns out, he carries his own set of gold beans, not for trade, but as a spiritual tether. Each one represents an ancestor. When he prays, he rubs them together like rosary beads. Each step I take, he murmurs, they walk with me. Fringe fact. Some Tuareg oral traditions describe gold as the blood of the earth, a gift from deep inside the planet, never to be wasted, only borrowed. You get the feeling if you sneezed on a bean, you'd be politely escorted out of the desert. You reach a stopping point, a caravanserai long abandoned, now just crumbling stone and goat bones. But here, history pulses underfoot. One carved rock displays ancient trade symbols, salt blocks, camel hooves, and yes, the unmistakable oval of a gold bean. A message left for those who pass through. Here, gold changed hands. Historians still argue whether gold was truly transported in large quantities across the desert, or whether what made it through was more ceremonial, small, symbolic amounts handed off from kingdom to kingdom. What is certain, every grain, every bean that crossed these sands did so at a cost. As you rest beside a fire, sipping lukewarm water that somehow tastes like sand and regret, the guide tells you a story that a legend, really, about a man who tried to carry too much gold. He ignored the elders' warnings, loaded his camels to the point of collapse. He made it halfway across the desert, but his greed slowed him down. His caravan splintered. The camels bolted. He died clutching a pouch of beans, buried by wind. His ghost, they say, still weighs travelers' pouches at night, whispering, "Too much, too much." You suddenly feel the weight of your tiny brass turtle charm like it's a brick. Before sleep, you sit alone under the stars. No buildings, no walls. Just sky and sand and the quietest hush you've ever heard. You look up and wonder how many stars are older than the gold you've been chasing. A million? All of them. A soft breeze kicks up, rattling your pouch. One of your replica beans rolls out. You pick it up and press it to your forehead like a talisman. And maybe, just maybe, you hear the wind whisper back, "Just enough." You rise before the sun this time. The desert air has cooled overnight, crisp and taut like the skin of a drum. Jen the camel greets you with a groan. Same energy as someone being woken for a 6 a.m. shift. You pat his neck anyway. You're in this together. You say your goodbyes to the Tuareg guide, who hands you a parting gift, one smooth white stone carved into the shape of a gold bean. "Not gold," he says with a wink, "but just as valuable, if you know what to listen for." And with that cryptic mic drop, he disappears back into the dunes. Your route now turns westward, back toward the forested interior. Baba has arranged for you to travel with a Fulani caravan. Herds of long-horned cattle surround you, walking in stately lines as if headed to a royal ball. These cows have better posture than you do. One of the herders, a wiry old woman with a voice like creaking wood, tells you that even cows were once used to smuggle gold beans, tied into their manes, hidden in earthen gourds tucked under saddles. Where there's a will, she grins, there's a moo. You learn from her that Fulani women were often in charge of managing household wealth, including weighing and storing gold. Instead of hiding it away, some kept their wealth woven into elaborate hair beads or sewn into ceremonial cloaks. That's your historical fact. In parts of West Africa, women were the custodians of portable wealth. Beans weren't just coinage, they were costume, and sometimes armor. In one village, you're shown a robe passed down through generations. It's trim-lined with what look like wooden toggles. But on closer inspection, you realize they're gold beans. Hundreds of them, carefully flattened and polished, forming a glittering defense. Against what? You ask. Against forgetting. Someone answers that a teenage boy explains how families sometimes gave a single bean to a newborn, buried in the earth nearby, and then dug it up years later, marking the passage of time. It's how we remember we came from the same soil, he says. And maybe where we're going. Your fringe fact? One oral tradition claims that gold beans could listen, that if you held one under your tongue while making a promise, it would record your words and curse you if you broke them. Naturally, you now eyeball your pouch with suspicion. You travel through wet grasslands now, where rain comes in sudden bursts and thunder sounds like distant drums. The caravan stops often, not out of weariness, but ritual. At one village, you witness a dance where bean-shaped gourds are shaken rhythmically to summon ancestors. At another, children play a counting game with hollowed beans filled with tiny pebbles, part math, part music. Each night, stories pass around the fire like sweet tea. Baba shares one about a thief who stole a gold bean from a sacred grove and found that it doubled in weight each day. Eventually, it crushed his house, then flattened his donkey, then sank into the earth. When he tried to dig it out, it turned into a termite mound. That mound, he says, is still there. You choose not to verify this. Historians still argue whether gold held this kind of spiritual charge for most West African cultures, or whether such beliefs were limited to specific clans or regions. But the layers of meaning, monetary, ceremonial, protective, can't be ignored. Gold wasn't just money. It was memory. It was music. It was warning that as you near the region once ruled by the Ashanti Empire, the forest thickens, the road narrows, trees close in, vines curl around your path like fingers, and the sky becomes a green glass ceiling. You pass under a wooden arch carved with symbols, birds, suns, and a familiar bean shape surrounded by swirling lines. You ask what it means. It's the soul, someone says. Gold is the soul that doesn't rot. You camp beside a river that night, and the air hums with frogs and night insects. Fireflies blink across the water like winking stars. A Fulani girl offers you a riddle. What is too small to carry the world, but too heavy to lose? You guess all sorts of things, your guilt, your camel, your sandals. She laughs and says, "It's trust." And then she presses a bean into your hand. You're carrying it now. You wake to the river's song that sounds like wind whispering secrets into cupped hands. The Fulani caravan has already moved on, their songs and cowbells fading into the trees. But Baba remains, sitting on a log, whittling what looks like, yes, another bean. Practice, he shrugs. Even old men forget the curves sometimes. You're getting close to Kumasi now, the heart of the Ashanti Empire, a kingdom so rich in gold they called it the land of the golden stool. And yes, that's not a euphemism for digestion. You'll see, the forest thickens as you go, until it's like walking through a cathedral made of green. Monkeys chatter overhead. Somewhere behind the trees, drums thump softly, keeping time with your heartbeat. A village checkpoint. You're stopped by a group of boys holding a stretched vine across the path. It's not a threat, it's a game. To pass, you must answer their question, what is gold made of? You pause. Baba raises his eyebrows. You say, sunlight and patience. They break into applause, lowering the vine. One kid offers you a mango. It tastes like sugar and summered. That's your fringe fact right there. Some Ashanti elders taught that gold was sun-trapped in stone. An echo of solar worship, maybe, or just poetic chemistry. Who's to say? When you finally reach Kumasi, the change is sudden and sharp. No more scattered huts. Now, you're among towering earthen buildings with carved pillars and thatched roofs. Courtyards bustle with traders in bright Kent cloth. You smell roasted peanuts, shea oil, wood smoke. It's like walking into a painting that smells incredible. And in the center of it all, the palace, not made of gold, contrary to what Western explorers once hoped, but rich in something more enduring. Rhythm, pride. Layers of power humming just under the skin of things that you're led through a gate guarded by warriors wearing cloaks sewn with gold discs. Not beans, this time, discs shaped like shields, birds, and eyes. Each symbol tells a story, a lineage, a lesson. Inside, you finally see it, the golden stool. Not a throne, not a chair, but something deeper, a symbol of the Ashanti soul. Legend says it descended from the sky, landing gently in the lap of the first Ashanti king. Made of solid gold, no one, not even the king, sits on it. It rests on its own stool, treated like a living being. Here's your historical fact. The golden stool is real. It still exists. And during colonial times, the British demanded to sit on it. The Ashanti response? A full-blown war. Over a stool. That's how sacred it is. Historians still debate whether the stool literally came from the sky or whether that story was crafted to unify warring clans under a single symbol. Either way, it worked. The stool became the heartbeat of the empire. Losing it would have meant spiritual extinction that you're allowed to look from a distance. No photos, no sketching. Just eyes and memory. Someone nearby says softly, "That's where all the beans belong." You're confused until Baba nudges you. Remember, young one, the stool isn't gold because of the metal. It's gold because of the weight it carries. You spend the evening in the palace library. Yes, a literal archive filled with palm leaf manuscripts, oral history scrolls, and, incredibly, a display case of ancient gold beans. Some are dented. Others shine like mirrors. One has a tiny face etched into it, eyes wide, mouth open as if eternally surprised to be here. The scholar explains that some Ashanti gold beans were inscribed with tiny glyphs, family crests, proverbs, trade routes. They weren't just money. They were micro-records, NFTs before NFTs. But useful. Before you leave, you're handed a book wrapped in cloth. Inside is a story of the Ashanti Wars, handwritten in a blend of Twi and English. Tucked between its pages, a replica bean, handmade, heavy. The inscription reads, "Remember the soul of the stool." That night, you sleep in a guest house with walls painted in earth tones and symbols, Sankofa birds, spirals, and a familiar oval shape. You dream of beans falling from the sky like soft rain, burying themselves in the soil, and the ground whispers back, "We remember." The morning in Kumasi glows gold even before the sun fully shows its face. Birdsong pours from the trees like a choir warming up for a ceremony you didn't know you'd been invited to. People pass your window carrying bundles wrapped in Kent cloth, offerings, perhaps, or just daily business wrapped in sacredness. You join Baba for a light breakfast, steamed plantains, and a sauce so spicy it politely evicts your taste buds. Baba watches your reaction, smirking. "A little fire to light the path," he says. "Today, you're heading to the edge of the city, where gold is not about palaces or politics, but craft. You're visiting a goldsmith's workshop. The building is modest, shaded by wide banana leaves. But the moment you step inside, you feel the temperature shift, the warm breath of molten metal, the hum of human focus. Hammers tap gently, like heartbeat echoes. Clay molds line the walls, and beside them, bowls filled with tiny gold beans, real ones this time. No replicas. Each bean gleams with its own personality. Some are pitted, some perfectly oval. Some bear ancient scars, as if they've lived through multiple lives. That here's your historical fact. West African goldsmithing, especially among the Ashanti, has long used the lost wax casting method, pouring molten gold into clay molds formed around wax models that melt away. The result? Stunning precision, and often bean-shaped weights made not just to measure gold, but made of it. The smith explains, in slow measured Twi translated by Baba, that these beans are keepers of balance. They don't just weigh other things, they remind the user to weigh their own heart. "A crooked scale shames the hand," he says, pressing a bean into your palm. "But a crooked heart shames the soul." The air smells like clay dust and palm oil. You watch as a young apprentice dips a rod into molten gold, withdrawing a single shimmering drop. It sizzles, hardens, and is quickly shaped into a new bean. That's how it happens. Not with treasure maps, not with dragons or vaults, just fire, patience, and practice. Your quirky tidbit today? Some smiths once wore special iron rings on their toes, believing it helped ground them during the melting process, to keep them from being enchanted by gold's glow. A kind of spiritual grounding wire. You glance at your bare feet. No ring. Better not stare too long into the smelter. After the workshop, Baba takes you to a quiet grove at the city's edge. No signs, no tourists, just trees and the hush of reverence. This, he says, is where the beings once spoke. Not metaphorically. According to local oral tradition, this grove is where judges and elders would come to weigh disputes, literally placing gold beans on a scale to settle fines, debts, and sometimes justice itself. But here's the twist. They didn't always weigh the gold. Sometimes they'd ask the accused to pick a bean, blindly, from a bowl of nearly identical ones. If the chosen bean was pure, their heart was believed to be pure. If it was alloyed, well, not so much. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic theater or a real belief in spiritual detection. But it worked. People feared those beans, not for their weight, but for what they might reveal. You sit in the grove a while, alone. You hold one of your replica beans in your palm, eyes closed. No scale, no bowl, just your breath and the forest, and you try it. You ask yourself a quiet question, something only you know the answer to. Then, you open your eyes and stare at the bean. It doesn't glow, doesn't sing, but maybe, just maybe, it listens. That night, Baba throws a small feast in your honor. Nothing fancy, just grilled fish, spicy yam balls, laughter, and a woman who plays a harp made from calabash and stretched animal hide. Her song is old, older than the stool, older than the path, maybe even older than the first bean. It tells of a time when gold grew on trees, but only those who didn't seek it could see it. That a child falls asleep beside you, being clutched in her tiny hand. You smile, remembering how many hands have held beans on this journey, and how each one meant something different. Not just currency, not just wealth, but memory, judgment, spirit, story. Your pouch is heavier now, not with gold, but with meaning, and maybe that's the most valuable load of all. Your journey is nearly at its end now. Baba wakes you gently, humming a tune you recognize from the harp the night before. The air is cooler today, brushed with the scent of wet leaves and something faintly metallic, like the breath of gold itself. If that were possible, that you're headed to the last stop, a sacred river known as the Pra. According to Baba, this river doesn't just flow through the land, it flows through time. Elders say it carries stories in its currents. Kings once bathed here before coronations, their gold weights scattered briefly in the water for cleansing. You're not sure whether to believe that, but honestly, at this point, you'd believe a being could recite poetry if held right. The path narrows until you're walking single file along a ridge of stone. Ferns unfurl like sleepy green tongues. Cicadas buzz in slow rhythm. Finally, the river appears, not wide, not fast, but deep and deliberate. Baba gestures for you to sit. From a small pouch, he pulls out his last gold bean. He holds it up to the light, its surface catching the sun like a wink. Then he leans forward and drops it gently into the water. It sinks without a ripple. This one, he says, was never for trade. You both sit in silence, long enough for your breathing to sync with the river's song, long enough for the world to soften its edges. You start thinking about how many kinds of value a single bean can hold. As coin, for spices, tools, cloth. As contract, for alliances and apologies.as memory, a token of a promise or a scar.as test, for courage or justice.as metaphor, the seed of a soul. Your historical fact this time? The Ashanti and many other West African cultures used gold not only for economic strength, but as a diplomatic tool. Gifts of gold, especially bean-shaped weights, were used in inter-kingdom negotiations, marriages, and even peace offerings. A single bean could change the tide of a war, or seal a friendship for generations that you're quiet for a while, until Baba turns to you. Do you still have your first bean? He asks. You nod. You pull it from your pouch. It's duller now, not because it's worn, but because your eyes have changed. You know more. And somehow, that makes it better. Truer, you consider tossing it into the river, too. But something stops you. Maybe you'll need it again.as you rise to leave. Baba doesn't say goodbye. He just hands you a folded cloth. Inside is a small scale, handmade, balanced, with one final gold bean resting on the dish. You know how to weigh things now, he says. That night, you find a quiet place to rest under the stars. The sky looks a little like gold dust scattered across black velvet. The breeze smells like damp leaves and distant wood smoke. You hold the scale in your lap and slowly rock it back and forth, not measuring anything, just feeling the motion. Somewhere, you hear a drumbeat, maybe from a village, maybe from the earth, or maybe from inside you. And slowly, the journey begins to fade. Now, just let yourself sink into the stillness. The river's voice fades into the hush of night, carrying away the last echoes of the trail behind you. You're no longer walking. You're floating, weightless and unburdened, like that first bean slipping beneath the surface, disappearing into memory. The trees rustle gently above your head, their leaves whispering lullabies older than language. Every creature has quieted down. Even the gold itself seems to sleep now, tucked deep beneath the soil like a dream you're not ready to wake from. You feel the fabric of your journey wrap around you, soft and familiar. The camel rides, the palace halls, the clink of beans on wooden scales. It all begins to blur into a warm haze. No sharp edges, no pressure to remember the details, just the feeling, the quiet knowing that you've carried something precious and maybe left something precious behind. Let your breathing slow. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Easy now that if your thoughts drift back to marketplaces or drums or glowing stools, let them come, then let them go. They've done their part. The night has you now, and here in the hush between one heartbeat and the next, in the gentle darkness that asks nothing of you, you rest. You are enough. You carry nothing. And you are carried. Sleep well, traveler.